Welcome! Today we're looking at the suggested way to play the scout when it comes to combat, the strengths and weaknesses of the class, the enemy types and the requirements to deal with them efficiently, what the other classes are good at, and we also have a ton of data from you, the community. I was absolutely blown away with over 200 responses to my survey. A huge thank you to you all, and an absolutely massive shout out for the players in my research group. The spirited debate and insight you provide is absolutely essential. Just like the mods I used to create this video, thank you to the creators. We've got a lot to go over today, so let's get into it. Before we can start to analyse the scout suggested playstyle, we first must know what the class strengths and weaknesses are. In general, our scout's primary weapons have a lower total ammo pool, especially when we compare this to other classes. There are of course some notable exceptions, such as rewiring mod on the Drac, which can just give you an insane amount of total ammo, but as a broad brushstroke, the scout has the least ammo or least ammo to DPS potential among our four classes. In this chart, we are comparing base total ammo pools across classes. We can see we are absolutely miles behind the gunner's minigun, but this chart is only total ammo, not DPS potential. Comparing the GK and the flamethrower on paper, there is not that much difference. When we actually get into game though, we can start to see the DPS potential or differences between these two options. The flamethrower has area of effect damage and other special properties that makes its damage potential outstrip our GK2, even though their total ammo is similar on paper. And we have some awesome survey responses here summarising some really great points. As the scout, we can deal with the horde, but most likely other classes are going to do it better and with a much more efficient ammo economy. And we start to understand our scout more, with the biggest weakness in combat likely being that lack of ammo. But on the flip side of this, the scout can actually deal a considerable amount of damage in a short amount of time. This quote from CC Shad goes over the fact that yes, he might be in a support role, but we can still do a huge amount of burst DPS damage. And in the scout's arsenal, we have so many good options for burst DPS or hitting really good breakpoints. And the scout obviously has some fantastic mobility options, not just with the grapple hook, but with different overclocks and builds that we can take. We can use this mobility super aggressively to double down on that burst DPS, or we can use it defensively, getting ourselves out of tricky situations. Plus, the scout has got some absolutely fantastic utility options. IFG grenades, the option to have pheromones, and being able to freeze targets all helps yourself and your team. We now have our scout's general strengths and weaknesses, but we need to start matching these up against the enemies we're going to be facing. The general consensus from my research group consisting of high level players is that there are four primary enemy groups. We've got the horde, high value targets, large single targets, and stationary enemies. Starting off with the horde, and they are our most common enemy type. These enemies requiring large ammo pools and or really good AoE damage, who also generally need good sustained damage to best deal with them. In my research group, there was a lot of heated debate around the high value target discussion, primarily around the threat order, but also regarding Praetorians and oppressors. Let's start off by examining our large single targets, what you all had to say in the survey, and what the high level players think. In my general survey, there were a lot of responses from you all saying that Praetorians and oppressors were high value targets, with many of you saying you now take the new super cooling chamber so that you can quickly take them down or using embedded detonators. But the high level players in my research group don't regard them as high value targets. This is because they take such a long time to reach you and other threats have a higher priority. Little Bobby Tables makes a great point that unless you need to stick in your current position, you can ignore them until later. And Meat Shield points out that you can actually sink ammo into them rather than using those resources on potentially more immediate dangers. Vryn points out that they can be dangerous in close quarters combat, but we have options to dodge or stop the attack, although this is harder when in hectic combat to be fair. We should also remember that when the oppressor becomes a danger to us, it also has a weakness from our melee. Ganging up with power attacks will delete them quickly. Our large single targets generally require a fair amount of our ammo or our total ammo to take them down, and we also need high DPS potential to kill them quickly and not get stuck or mired down trying to deal with them. Our high level players focus on these targets so much because of the immediate danger they pose to ourselves and the team. They have a potential for high amount of damage, but also to disrupt the team, either knocking people around or splitting the group out of good firing positions. This is why you will often see players discussing good breakpoints or quick burst damage to take down these high value targets. Our high value targets are going to spawn less frequently and consume far less total ammo compared to our large single targets. Ideally, we need a good medium to high damage, which is going to provide us those good breakpoints or burst damage to kill them quickly. Finally, we have the stationary enemies. The biggest consideration is the cave leech having a good breakpoint to kill it in one shot. The spitball infector, although it can be dangerous, especially on escort missions, we can also shoot down its bullets and avoid them quite quickly. The breeder can be annoying, putting a lot of pressure on our team, but we would still prioritise our high value targets in the horde before going off to go and find that breeder. Bringing this all together, and if we have our scout strengths, which we've got in green, and weaknesses, which we've got in red, and then match this up against our requirements to take down certain enemy types, we can start to see where this picture is starting to come out. Now, of course, this is a very general sweeping statement. You can build the scout in different ways, different overclocks can change this, but as a general rule of thumb, this is where we land with the scout and our enemies. And utilising the scout strengths to take on our high value targets is something we've got here in these fantastic survey responses. Stu got saying that he lights for the team and then scans the ceiling for high value targets. Golden Boy really nicely summarising what we've just gone over in the previous sections. And I love this quote from Norton: "The primary is for doing the scout's job, the secondary is for getting me out of trouble," presumably talking about the use of special powder. And this last quote is absolutely fantastic, killing most of the annoying bugs whilst letting the team deal with the horde. And we can also see this high value target focus in our general survey, with 74% of you saying that that's your primary target selection. And if we bring in our high level players in my research group, we can see it's 100% have selected that they take on high value targets. I also got some data on the primaries people are using, the general survey having the M1000 at top with 43%. But if we go side by side with the high level players here, we can see that it's a huge difference, with the M1000 and its superior breakpoints being chosen most often. And finally, we have the other classes which can fulfill the roles that the scout potentially isn't built for, such as taking on the horde and dealing with large single targets. Again, this is a real general sweeping statement here, but this is generally where the other classes are strong. And they can start to use their strengths against horde and large single targets, whilst we focus on the high value targets. And in my general survey, I asked how you built the other classes. I wanted to see if you would fill those gaps that the scout has. And we can see with the driller here, a huge focus on horde, which is exactly what we want as the scout, because we don't want to be focusing on them. With the gunner and the engineer, it's interesting we've got a high percentage of 50-50 taking on the horde and large single targets. This really leaves us the gap for the scout to focus on those high value targets. And finally, we get to the primary suggested scout playstyle as agreed upon by the majority of the high level players I spoke to. Now, they really pushed themselves on modded difficulties such as Hazard 6x2, Hazard 7 and beyond, and this is the recommended playstyle they use most often. We can see this playstyle in action with this footage from Assembly Storm. Here you can really see him focus on those high value targets, waiting until it's a prime opportunity to fire at them, ignoring the rest of the targets. This saves the team from having to focus them, they can carry on focusing on the horde, but also it's potentially saving them from so much damage and disruption. This footage from Little Bobby Tables really highlights the scout's utility, providing illumination for everyone to see better, but also scanning the area, making sure he's available to take on the high value targets when they appear. The utility also goes towards dropping IFGs, but then it's still complete focus on trying to take on high value targets to save the team. And here is a clip of me doing it completely wrong, focusing on the Praetorians instead of scanning the area. This is why I missed the acid spitters and the goo bombers coming in, and instead of being on top of them and taking them down quickly, I'm behind the game. Not focusing high value targets can have a big impact on our allies. Here we're assuming a scout has killed the acid spitters on the left hand side, but on the right hand side they're still causing us problems. We can see I need to start falling back, whereas on that left hand side I'm keeping that sustained DPS going with the flamethrower. Now on the right hand side I get stuck on terrain as I keep falling back, and we can just see the calamity here as it's starting to cause more and more issues. And this is with the luxury of somewhere to fall back to. If you've got a wall behind you or you're trying to protect a black box, you might not have that option. And we can see just how far I've fallen back on this right hand side. Way off in the background is where I effectively am when there are no acid spitters. This is all about playing to our strengths as the scout and allowing or enabling our allies or our other classes to play to their own strengths. This playstyle was used so often by the modded difficulty players because once you start going above hazard 5, you need your entire team and all of the classes working to their strengths, not being distracted or bogged down by doing something they aren't really built for. For the base game difficulties, you obviously have a lot more leeway. Yes, you can build the scout to focus on the horde, and you can win the majority of your games. But if you start to track your losses and actually analyse them, I would think that high value targets have played a major role in a lot of them. And as our general survey stats suggest, the other classes are probably going to be built to take on the horde and or large single targets anyway, leaving you that gap to really focus on those high value targets. There are of course different ways you can build the scout. Assembly Storm likes to call this the combat scout, where you can do a bit of everything. I'm calling it the all-round combat scout, and other players have said it's the jack of all trades. Before we look at the combat scout in more detail, I just want to say these videos take such a long time to produce and go through 215 survey responses. I'd really appreciate if you found anything helpful, give the video a like and potentially subscribe. And coming back to this all-round combat build, the player Amy suggests the M1000 hipster with blow-through and using embedded detonators. This build I used for about 9 promotions before going over to focus, and it really is a great all-round build. And I had to include this absolutely awesome survey response from Axis Kronos. If you haven't checked out his YouTube channel, you should do. He makes awesome DRG content, and he makes a superb point here, because if we're focusing as the scout on our objectives, we're going to avoid fights and swarms for the team. But if you do end up in a fight, I highly recommend you follow the high value target playstyle. And you can absolutely see it in action if you watch any of the videos by these players. I really highly recommend you do, and all of their links are in the description. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to like the video if you found anything helpful. The rest of the Scout series should be linked at the top right of the screen, and thank you so much to the players who helped out with the production of this video.